have a chat with me. I know this will be a super valuable one for the listeners.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
I think your story is really interesting, and how you actually managed to get to becoming a sleep consultant is a really interesting story. And I would love for you to sort of share that with us, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course, no problem. So my son was born in Doha in 2014, and when I met my husband, he had already had 2 children in his previous marriage. So I honestly thought I was marrying a parenting expert. Not to say he's not a parenting expert, but I really felt like I was marrying someone who knew exactly what to expect and anticipate. And so I was pretty relaxed about finding out what it was going to be like once the baby was born. I focused a lot on how I was feeling during my pregnancy and taking care of me, but I didn't really look ahead to when my son was born, how I was going to take care of him, and the challenges that might present. And I also was 39 when he was born, so I was fairly happy that I'd had a full and exciting life up until that point. So I was really willing to give myself over to being a mother and to sort of doing whatever the child needed from me, which is all great and fine, and it kind of aligns with what some people would describe as attachment parenting, and I certainly identified with that quite a lot in the early years of my son's life. So I was breastfeeding, I was co-sleeping, I was responding, I was very aware of kind of the sensory type of activities that is suggested for babies, without potentially spending an awful lot of time on self-care, but also without necessarily recognizing the importance of something fundamental to our well-being, which is sleep. So as a result of being so responsive, it was more like the baby was deciding what was needed as opposed to the parent. And obviously, as an adult, I've got a much better handle on what's important than a newborn baby. I'm not saying babies don't know what they need, but in terms of the wider world, babies are obviously not in a place to be clear on all of the things that we as human beings require to live well and to live healthily. So fast forward 2.5 years, my husband and I were in separate rooms. We had tried all kinds of things to encourage our son to sleep through the night. And the reality was that he had no good sleep habits, or no independent sleep habits. Good and bad is not great words to use to describe the circumstances, of course, but what people would describe as good is what I would describe as independent. So he needed someone there. He needed someone there at nap time. He needed someone there at bedtime. He needed someone there through the night. He was still being breastfed at 2.5. So if I was nearby, it would be that. If his dad was nearby, it would be some form of physical comfort. And the reality is we were all exhausted. Joseph was absolutely under the target of sleep for his age. And it could not carry on in our home for any longer. So having Googled, sleep training or healthy sleep to death, we decided to hire a sleep consultant because we wanted hands-on help. And we lived in Abu Dhabi at the time. We managed to find a lady in Dubai who helped us with our sleep training journey. And it was quite literally so transformative for us as a family. It was like a miracle descended on our home. My husband and I were back in our room. My son was in his own room. Just things like my son outgrew 2 cots before he ever slept in them. That's how little time he spent in his own bed. And in between the time in which we embarked on sleep training him, within a month, I was on a plane to Florida to retrain to be a sleep consultant, because I just knew I had to bring this experience and this opportunity to sleep well to other families. And at the time, because we lived in Abu Dhabi, I knew there was nobody else in Abu Dhabi offering that, because we had hired our lady from Dubai. And so I knew there was a lot of families in Abu Dhabi that would benefit and that needed this, because I was talking to anybody who was stood still for more than 5 seconds. How does your child sleep? What do you do? How do you get them to sleep? Why is it working for you and not working for me? Why am I failing at this and you're succeeding? I was analysing and interviewing anybody who was a parent with a child, whether they were younger or older or same age as my son. So it was, I was kind of not obsessive, but I was very absorbed by it as a subject. And once it had been resolved for us, and it was so amazing to have that experience, I just wanted to, as I say, give that gift of sleep to other families. So I got on a plane to Florida. That was the last day that I breastfed my son. I had to leave the country to wean him off breastfeeding, which again sounds quite radical, and in hindsight probably is, but I've been in a lot of mums' position. I know what it feels like to be both at a loss of how to handle things and what to do, and therefore am also well placed to help them with their journey to get the outcome that they want and deserve.
So you actually touched on quite a few very important points during that sort of explanation of how you managed to get to sleep consulting. So I will take you back a few steps, if that's okay with you, and ask you a few questions, and maybe if you could sort of share. You explained that you were struggling with sleep with your son, and it was 2.5 years. And I know from you've sort of mentioned that the longest period of time you actually managed to sleep during that 2.5 years was 5 hours, which is incredible to think that you managed to get through 2.5 years on like the biggest chunk of sleep was 5 hours. And so you must have felt pretty exhausted. Do you remember how you felt back then, or is that sort of a distant memory now?
So my son's 5.5, so it's just over 3 years ago. And although the real feeling of it isn't there, because I sleep really well now and so does he, the actual reminders of the experience are still quite real. So that 5 hours was one time only. Okay, that was one night of 5 hours. Every other prior night, it would have been every couple of hours or every hour or every 3. So that was and that's why I know that, because it was so relevant. It was like this one night of yay, 5 hours, wow, But that also means he only ever got 5 hours, in one go, and that's why it's still quite real and raw, because whatever works for family is fine. There's never a problem unless there's a problem. But now on reflection, that is not healthy beyond the age in which a child needs to be fed sort of regularly in the night. In other words, little babies obviously need to wake up, let's say every 3 hours or 4 hours for feeding, but he was not a little baby anymore. He was developmentally mature enough to have longer chunks of sleep night after night, consecutive nights, and he didn't. So I do recall, very, very kind of clearly the physical drain it has on me and him and my husband. I lived in a place called Al Zaina in Abu Dhabi, which is right under the flight path, and there's an A380 that goes over at 2 a.m. every morning, and I know I used to hear that plane pretty much every night. So that's pretty real still. 3 years later, I know that, very much for sure. I remember driving down the highway. So Al Zain is out of the city. Raha Beach is by the airport in Abu Dhabi, so anyone who knows the geography. And I used to go to a class with him in the city, and I used to drive on that particular road, and then suddenly look around and realize I'd got 30k down the road and can't quite remember the starting point and where I got to now, that sort of dazed feeling. And I remember going to a shop to buy some new trousers, Banana Republic, and trying on a size, and the lady saying to me, "These are way too big for you." I'd lost more weight. I didn't even recognize myself because I was so kind of a shell of myself that I couldn't believe that she was offering me a smaller pair of trousers, saying, "Thank you, that was great." But, because I was just so depleted, breastfeeding obviously uses up a lot of calories, but I wasn't really taking care of myself in other areas such that I was at my best self. So I do remember it being a tough time. Obviously lucky for us, we're out the other side, but there is one sort of element that I do keep as a reminder of our journey. And on my desktop, on my computer, my screensaver is a picture of my son when he started nursery. He's about just over 18 months old, and he sat on this little bench in the playground of nursery, and he looks for all the world like the happiest little child you've ever seen, with these big black circles and lines under his eyes. And when we hired our sleep consultant, she helped us to work out, she asked us to fill out this sort of graph thing of how much sleep he was having. And he was having about 9 hours sleep a night, and he should have been having 12. So my little boy, who's happy, who's enjoying nursery, who's enjoying life, is 3 hours of sleep too little every night, night after night after night. So the point about me keeping that screensaver is to remind myself both of where we've come and what we've achieved, and to keep me wanting to help others, but also to sort of show me that even if a child's super happy and super jolly and super, enjoying life, doesn't necessarily mean to say they're as well rested as they could be.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's really empowering now for you, because knowing how much of a difference it's made to your life, and knowing that you can give that to other families as well, is a pretty incredible feeling. That must have impacted you quite a lot mentally, surely, that sleep deprivation and that sort of days and the exhaustion that you feel because you don't get enough sleep, as well as then having a newborn baby to look after. You sort of mentioned something that really resonated really strongly with me, because you said that you were really healthy during your pregnancy. You really focused on staying healthy and looked after yourself, but you never looked past your pregnancy. And it's the same. I did exactly the same. And maybe that's part of the joy of not knowing, is actually part of being able to enjoy that pregnancy.
Yes.
But I had the same feeling, where you have then a newborn, and that learning curve is so steep, and any new mom will sort of relate to that, because that learning curve is so incredibly steep, especially in those early months. But that, coupled with the lack of sleep, must have been pretty challenging altogether.
Yeah, I mean, we were quite lucky at the very start, as in the first newborn phase, the first 12 weeks. I mean, he was co-sleeping with us, and as in 3 of us in a bed. And my husband still managed to get up and go to work every day. So, that part I think was sort of okay. And, the flush of love. And I was lucky. I didn't really have any baby blues or PND. So, I was really able to enjoy and appreciate him for the first few weeks. We didn't have a lot of challenges. I had my parents staying with me as well. So there were times during the day where I could definitely catch up on that. Joseph was always being held by someone, which is good and bad. But, at the time it was fine. Yeah. There's 2 things that I can say about that, though. The first thing is, we went to the UK, Joseph and I, to visit friends and family, for me to sort of introduce him to people. And we came back, and my husband said, "What happened? It's like you broke him while we went on holiday, or you went on holiday." It was like a different child I'd come home with, because he had gone from sleeping quite well to no longer sleeping at all well. And that was basically the 4-month sleep regression, unbeknownst to us at the time. The second thing was, I was diagnosed with PTSD he was about 10 or 11 months old. So I'd had a pretty traumatic birth. And so the first 3 months of his life, where I was in this flushing period, was great. But then once his sleep deteriorated, my PTSD started to become more and more noticeable, particularly to my husband, because my sleep was deteriorated, of course. And I was just really quite, I mentioned about being a shell of my former self, just almost zombie-like in the way that I would just do things. And it wasn't that I wasn't able to be loving and giving to my son, but what I'm saying is, my husband was telling me, "You are not you. You are not the you that we know, and the best version of you." And what I do want parents to know and understand is that we don't get a badge for being sleep deprived. We don't get an extra gold star or something else to say, you've suffered, therefore you're a better parent, or a parent that needs extra acknowledgement. We all do the best job that we can do, but we can never do the most optimal if we're sleep deprived, because we obviously, as as an individual, are ourselves therefore depleted, and so consequently we're short-tempered, we don't make good choices, we don't feel like we're able to engage in the way that we'd like to do, or we'd like to. So it's such a fundamental element. So I really feel like sometimes mums get this sort of message that, oh, it's very natural for children to wake up in the night, or it's very normal for children to want to be near you, or it's very normal for your baby to need to feed. And it is, until you realize that it's very normal to sleep, over and above everything, or in addition to everything. It's a basic human need: shelter, food, and sleep. Okay, they are part of a trigraph. Put one to one side. Okay, the shelter may still be there, the food may still be there, but you're operating at a 30% reduced capacity, which is obviously significant. So it does say something if we're willing to put that a third of our basic human need to one side and kind of ignore it, thinking that it'll all be fine. It really isn't necessarily the case at all.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I think it's so important to remember that actually being your best self means that you're a better parent to your child. And I know that I wasn't very good with the sort of interrupted sleep. And so I knew that it was something that I needed to address, because I wanted to be a better parent during the day to my daughter. Because for me, staying patient was very challenging, having had very little sleep. And I mean, I would like to, I guess, it is, you mentioned that it is normal in some circumstances. Is that the first sort of 4 months where they say the fourth trimester? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, you can either be blessed with a very sleepy newborn, or you can be blessed with a very not sleepy newborn. And I know both are a blessing, obviously. I remember I did a sort of little workshop at a shop called Mammy's in Al Seef Mall in Abu Dhabi. I'll just give them a small shout out, because it's not a chain store, it's a locally run shop. And this lady came in with a 7-week-old baby, and she said she's so happy, she's so easygoing, but she doesn't sleep. And this was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and this little girl woken up at 7 o'clock that morning and had not slept. Okay, now newborn babies of that age should be asleep about every hour. And I was looking at this child thinking, wow. And she was happy, and she was smiling, and she was the sweetest little thing. She wasn't screaming the house down. And I think sometimes, because there's no obvious reaction in some situations, and if your baby's crying, you think, well, I've got to do something to resolve this, and there's something going on, there's something that needs to be fixed or helped in some way. But when your baby isn't, maybe you're not seeing that there is something going on that there shouldn't be, of course, particularly if you're a new parent or you're a busy parent. This is part and parcel of life, isn't it? We get sort of dragged into being and doing other things. This was also a working mum. She was a teacher, so she was very busy and sort of reasonably stressful job. The point being that even if we're sleep deprived, it may not be there outwardly, and it wasn't with this little baby, but it still doesn't mean to say it's something that she didn't need. She definitely did need it. It just wasn't, in the mum's space, as it were. And we can operate at less than perfect capacity, but still operate. That's the reality. It becomes a new normal. I had created a new normal for myself. My son had a normal. He didn't know any different, obviously. But like you say about patience, was I as patient as I could be? Was I, being as enthusiastic about doing certain things with him as I could be? And for me, just as a personal experience, because we didn't sleep for 2.5 years, that's why I'm a mum of only one child. Now, that also might seem quite radical to a lot of people, but I was 39. I was always going to be, on the cusp of maybe would it be time to fit another child in. But more importantly, there was no way I was going to go ahead and get pregnant and be sleep deprived, deal with a toddler and have a baby and be sleep deprived. I just couldn't even imagine taking that on. And so by the time we sleep trained Joseph and came out the other side. I mean, it's not like a week after we sleep trained, we were like, okay, let's go again. By the time it had all settled down, basically it was too late. So for me, I'm never going to get that opportunity back. It's never going to be a position I'm going to be in again. I'm going to think, we've now got time to. I'm 45 now, so it is a living regret to have not dressed our circumstances sooner, knowing that maybe I would have be a mum to more than one child now.
But being able to gift that back to another mother and hopefully allow some mums to realize that it's okay to notice that sleep is something that should be allowed as a mom. I think, like you say, sometimes in society we talk about how we are we're giving up so much, and that's something that's commended, I guess, right? And I think it's okay to say, like, look, sleep is needed for you and your baby, and actually it's something that we can all strive towards. And I think this just brings me, I want to go back a few steps in a second, but this just brings me back to just mentioning here that sleep training doesn't necessarily mean cry it out.
Yeah. So there's a lot of sleep training, I think, is a bit of a taboo subject in certain circles or in certain groups or forums or cultures even. There's a lot of controversy as well as anything else. And, parenting is an emotive subject and people have got a lot of opinions, okay? I don't have any agenda whatsoever, that I have no interest in trying to tell people that they should do something if they're not interested in making that change. Whatever's not a problem in your home is not a problem in your home, okay? It's only when it is a problem that the consideration of hiring a sleep consultant should be there. But it is not necessarily that there's a need for the baby to cry, okay? Children will get upset if they're tired and they have something difficult to deal with, okay? And making a change in the life of any human being can often be perceived by that human being as difficult. The reality is, cry out, which is also probably one of the most, if not the most well-used method of sleep training, if you can call it training, is basically when you put your child to bed and you leave the room and you don't go back.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no returning to comfort or anything of any contact nature until the next morning. Okay, now to a lot of people that might sound quite radical, but the other end of the spectrum is pre-internet, pre-social media, pre-Google. Probably most families were cry out families, or a version of. I'm 45, so I have a lot of friends from childhood who had their babies in their 20s. And believe me when I say those are working mothers who had husband, a home to run, food to put on the table, laundry to do. They don't have helpers. We're talking about UK-based people. They don't have nannies. Some of them don't even have families living nearby to help them. When their babies were put to bed at night, they were put to bed upstairs. They went downstairs. They had to get on with the chores, have a relationship, do whatever they needed to do. They weren't sat outside their children's door on the landing or holding their hand or, doing all the extra things that we're doing now. I'm not saying that they were, purist cry out in terms of didn't go back in the room for 12 hours, but they could only respond based on their available time at that point in their life. And those children are all fine. Okay, there is nothing wrong with those children. They're not emotionally scarred. They don't remember it, by the way. Children don't remember it. The parents aren't particularly emotionally scarred, because I've spoken to them about this at length. But, it was all that was being done then. They didn't have any influential elements. So since we've got a world in which technology is right there in front of us, and there is something to back up any opinion or any viewpoint or any style that you like. If you Google attachment parenting, of course, there's pros and cons, but if you want the pros, you'll just seek out the pros, which is what I did. If you only want to find something to back up flat earth, then it's going to be there. Okay. So what needs to be borne in mind is there is a way that suits you. You just need to seek that way out. But crying is not harmful to babies. Babies are born to cry, essentially. They do cry. On average, babies cry 3 hours a day. You know, that's a factual average. Colic babies cry 3 hours a day, 3 days a week for 3 weeks. Okay. So, you know, if the crying was so harmful, there would be very, very, doctors concerned about colic babies. Well, they're concerned, but they're not concerned about the crying. It's not the crying that concerns them. It's the why have they got colic, as an issue. And since colic is not actually definable, apart from the amount of crying, what doctors don't know is what is colic. They're not spending a lot of time worrying about the actual colic, about the crying. They're actually trying to figure out what's causing the crying. So the crying is like the output. It's not really the issue. So I don't want people to think that all sleep training is about crying. But what I do want people to recognize and realize is that crying out is just one way, and it's really moved away from popularity since we've had, as I say, the access of technology readily available to us. Nothing wrong with it if that's what people want to do. It's not what I use, because my view is if you want quiet out, you don't need a sleep consultant. You just need to shut the door and walk away. However, what I also say to parents is, try to recognize that crying is very normal for babies and they have no problem doing it. We don't love to hear it. Yeah. But babies have no problem doing it.
I guess it's just their way of communication, right? Until they can actually vocalize what they're thinking, which is quite far into, it's 2.5, 3 years old when they can actually truly communicate. So it's just their way of communication. And I think it took me a while to come to terms with that, because I think as a mother, it really sort of, as soon as you hear your child crying, you just want to do something to stop them from crying. But it's a survival instinct, isn't it? It's to protect your baby. But we're no longer in that kind of environment where we need to protect them instantly, or at least respond to every cry, because it's just their way of communication.
Exactly. I mean, look, there's a number of elements. If you're breastfeeding and your baby's really new, it's quite a hormonal thing. If your baby cries, your breast milk can, come in. Okay. I remember I was in a car with a friend and our babies were born within 2 weeks of each other. My baby cried and her milk came in. I mean, it's literally primeval in sense of the actual reaction to your body. But of course, when your milk comes, there's a hormonal change in you. And so you feel it. And so you think, yeah, I must react. That is essentially a human nature element, like you say, the survival part. Well, we're no longer living in caves, so it doesn't really apply. As you say, it's communication before they can speak. It's still used beyond the time in which they can speak as their main method of communication, because of course it's familiar, it's comfortable, it's natural. It's never about the crying though, it's about something else, and the crying is like the output. The thing I think that is the problem for us now as parents is, one, society. You hear a crying baby, you think, well, why isn't that parent making that stop, do something about that? And the second thing, as adults, we only cry usually if there's something very seriously wrong, and often when we're sad. Babies don't cry when they're sad. Babies aren't really sad. So if you think about it, if my son will cry and tell me he's happy at the same time. He's not sad, therefore he's crying. So my job is not to therefore make him happy or worry about the fact he's sad. But because as adults, we typically cry when we're sad, we relate crying to sadness. So we think, oh my gosh, my baby's sad. I need to do something to make them not sad.
Right.
Likelihood is they're not sad, though. It's not about sadness. And that's very challenging to wrap your head around. Like you said, Samaya, it does take a while to reconcile. It's about figuring out, why are they crying and what can I do to help them with that? Yes. That's what sleep training identifies for parents. Okay, let's figure out what this crying is about and then deal with that. Not to be too bogged down in the crying. The other thing to say about crying is, and I'm quite passionate about this, because babies do need to cry often, because crying forms a number of different types of serves a number of different types of elements for babies. Apart from communication, it's also, there are toxins in tears, so it's like an offloading of toxins. Right. It's also pent up frustration or pent up emotion. So when you hear about terrible twos, just as an example, terrible twos, I think 2-year-olds get a really bad rap because all you hear is, oh, they had a meltdown here, or oh, they lost their mind over a blue cup, or oh, my child just can't do anything without throwing themselves on the floor and having a tantrum. The thing about when they turn 2 is they start to realize the hierarchy of the world, and they start to become aware of their position, but they also have to sort of get to an age where they are taking on more. And the problem is that they may have a number of different experiences throughout the day that's new to them and that they have to manage. So when they lose their mind because you gave them the blue cup, they haven't lost their mind over the blue cup. They've had 5 previous experiences, particularly if they're in daycare or nursery. They were playing with a toy quite happily, someone took it away. They spoke to the helper and said, I'm upset, and the helper said, don't worry, here's another toy. What? You've invalidated their feelings. You gave them a sandwich, they wanted a cracker, but they can't communicate, they can't tell you what they want to eat. They're being fed all the time through our choice. They wanted to wear a red t-shirt, you gave them a blue. By the time they've got to having a blue cup when they needed a green cup, it isn't just that, it's all the things that went before them. And so for them, they need to let it out. You'll see toddlers cry and lose their mind, and 10 minutes later be happy and cheerful and running around the place as though that never happened. That's an offloading of the toxins of all of the pressure of the previous experiences. And it's terrible too, because they're experiencing the world at 2 in a different way to previously. Then they get through it and they move on to the next developmental stage, which obviously creates its own challenges. But for them, crying is a way to release that pressure valve and then go about their day. It is not, we don't want our child breaking down in the middle of Carrefour, obviously, but apart from that, they need to work through it. Otherwise, it's just going to become rage. And, that's not better.
Sure. And I guess then the crying, when you are adjusting their routine, is similar, because they are just communicating that there's a change and they're trying to understand the change, and maybe there's new neural pathways that need to be formed.
Exactly. The way I explain it to parents right now, in the last 3 months, especially UAE parents, in the last 3 months, somebody has decided that we're not allowed to leave our house. Okay. Now, on the day that happened, believe me when I say I was not the happiest person I've ever been. Okay, because as soon as someone tells me that I can't do something, I absolutely want to do the thing that they could tell me I cannot do. That's my personality, but it's not really that unusual for human beings. We do not like change. We are predisposed to resist change, even if change is good for us. Bearing in mind that they were making that change for the betterment of, or for the protection of us. Okay, so you cannot leave your house because there's a virus and you might get sick. Well, I really want to leave my house. Well, it's not even logical, is it? It doesn't make any sense to want to do that. However, so protesting change. So I had like a week where I was eating chocolate every night and, is it wine o'clock yet? And all that kind of thing. And then I was like, okay, I see where this has gone. Lucky me, I live in the UAE. They're protecting us. They're very thoughtful about it, etc. Came out the other side, pretty happy with the outcome. Went through that period of total quarantine. The day they decided to, relax the quarantine, I couldn't have been happier. Okay, yeah. It's the same for children. I've decided that you're going to fall asleep in a different way, and I'm not going to consult with you about it, and I'm not going to discuss it with you, and I am not going to, even have your opinion on it. I'm just going to do it to you, and guess what? You're going to put up with it. Obviously, if you're 4 months, 6 months, 2 years old, 6 years old, for you, that's a change that's imposed upon you. Therefore, it's quite natural to push back against that change, and children, as a natural reaction to things, will cry. Okay, but it's measured. I am tired. I just want to go to sleep. And today you're going to do something different than you've done 100% of my life. Why? It's about navigating what is the issue in and of the moment, helping them to manage that feeling, knowing that it's not the journey, it's the outcome that is the important part.
And children are very adaptable.
Precisely. Honestly, it's incredible. People will say to me, oh, I'm really worried about getting rid of the dummy or pacifier. And I'll say, believe me when I say that is an item that they could not care less about once they sleep train. And literally, I mean, within 24 hours, it could be as quick as that they've gone from thinking that is the most important thing on the planet to not needing it whatsoever. Children are adaptable, and children take information based on what their parents deliver to them. So if you deliver, this is your new bed, and it's really super comfortable, and you're going to have a lovely sleep in it, they will be fine. If you deliver, my goodness, are you going to be okay? Oh, I'm worried you're not going to sleep very well on this bed tonight. I wonder if I should do something to compensate for the fact that I am worried that you're not going to sleep very well. Guess what? They're not going to sleep very well, because they've seen the anxiety in you about this bed, and their immediate reaction is, Mummy's not very happy. Mummy's worried, therefore I should be worried. Mummy's, concerned, therefore I should be concerned. They read body language better than any other age, because if they're not verbal, they have to communicate in other ways. So they know. I say it to people, they can smell it. They know. There's no doubt. If you're calm and relaxed, they know. If you're not calm and relaxed, they know.
So it's really that you have to be fully, as a parent, as a mother, you have to be really sort of fully invested in making the change for it to be a successful outcome.
Well, yes and no. What I say to parents when I have initial call with everybody who contacts me and about should I be sleep training my child, or I want to sleep train, or however the sort of introduction that they make to me is about what's going on. And what I say to them in that call is, in the 3 years I've been doing this and the 250 children I've worked with, I know exactly what, based on your child's age, is they need, and I know how to get you there. Okay, and I can give you information, advice, support, experience. I can, really hold your hand through the process and make it work for you. But I cannot give you the commitment, because I am not going around the UAE putting babies to bed. I am imparting advice and guidance and knowledge on parents, and then asking them to follow through on that with my support, with my input. But the reality is, at 9 o'clock I turn my phone off. And so if their child wakes up between 9 p.m. and 8 a.m., they are dealing with that, even though I've advised them how.
Yeah.
So if they decide at 2 a.m. to not do what I've said and to do whatever they've previously done, which is not for me to tell them that they shouldn't, what I know there is their commitment for change is quite low, and it's not the time for them to embark upon this. What that means is that, either they're not ready or they weren't expecting it to be the way it is. Now, as long as they are committed to making the change and seeing it through, we can carry on the next night and the next night. But genuinely, for example, just to keep it really simple, if you've breastfed your child to bed every night for the last 12 months, and I say to you tonight, you're not going to do that, and you do, it normally indicates that actually you're probably not ready to stop breastfeeding your child throughout the night. And that's totally fine. I wasn't ready until my son was 2.5. But what I'm saying is that I can't make you be committed. So as long as you're committed, I can motivate you, I can support you, I can help you, I can really reassure you, as I say, throughout this journey. But the commitment element, as in the starting point, the conscious decision that you want your child to fall asleep without breastfeeding, has to come from you. It's not for me to persuade you should. There's many statistics out there that can tell you that, and that's, whether or not you've decided that is totally your decision.
So that you mentioned something really critical there, breastfeeding to sleep, which is one of the things, if you are sort of working to sleep training your child, is to move the feeding to an earlier time in the evening. So could we just touch on some techniques or some tips for bedtime that really help get your child ready for sleep? Because we all know how important it is for a child to sleep. I think by this point, I think all parents will know that sleep is important to a child for their developmental sort of well-being and just their emotional well-being as well, because they need good sleep as well to be able to regulate their feelings, emotions as well. And so I think we're all sort of sold on that, but sometimes the routine can have a big impact on how your child actually falls asleep and how well they are able to fall asleep, and then they're getting the timing right as well. And I know the timing obviously is different for every parent and every sort of family, and that will depend on the age of the child as well. But I think the routine pretty much is similar through the sort of the age of the child. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you want to be mindful of with regards to what a routine is. A routine is a signpost or a signal or an indicator to a child that the next thing that's going to happen to them is they need to wind down and get ready to go to sleep. And by wind down, I mean relax. So studies have proven that the human brain needs to be relaxed in order to fall asleep. So as adults, if we've got lots of things running through our mind, you know, what we're going to do tomorrow, how today went, have we got bills to pay, and all the kinds of elements that can take over when we're lying in the dark, we're not going to fall asleep until we've dealt with that, you know, until we've put that to one side. For little babies, obviously they don't, or you know, children, I'm talking about a range of children aged from, let's say, 0 to 10 years old. They don't obviously have those concerns, but somewhere in amongst those age ranges, there's different types of anxieties, let's say, that can prevent sleep. Yeah. Depending on the age, will be a different type of concern that's going on in their mind. If you've got a routine, what you're doing is you're signposting to the child, okay, along this path, then one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to be put into bed, and that's where sleep happens. When you've got a child, let's say between 0 and 5 years old, in other words, newborn and 5 years old, the ability to explain to them what sleep really means is pretty much nil. As in, when I talk to you about sleep, I'm not going to assume, but I'm going to just give you a best guess. What you probably think is lay down in bed, shut eyes, be still, it's dark, it happens. Okay, that's pretty much what happens to an adult. Children don't even know they need to shut their eyes. All children who are young will lay there with their eyes open until just before they fall asleep. They don't even know they have to shut their eyes in order to go to sleep. So fundamentally, children don't understand sleep. Okay, so if you think of it in those terms, they are not, you know, on a chips are down, let's say. So the routine helps them to start to recognize, I have a bath, I get dressed, you know, mummy reads me a story, we have a cuddle, I go into bed. That gets repeated, and it happens at time when I'm tired, and then the next thing is sleep. So in terms of routine, you cannot underestimate the value, the importance, the element that will support your child into learning that winding down and relaxing and sleep coming next is the stage of that, the next stage of that. So routines. Dark rooms, please don't underestimate the power of a crack of daylight coming in through the tiny little bit of curtain. Since COVID, I work virtually. Prior to COVID, I would go to see people at home. And when I see them at home, I'd say, okay, let's shut the curtains. I'd be there during the day, usually, not always. Okay, those are not blackout curtains. There is too much light coming in, and it's really easy to underestimate the power of that. So dark room, cool room. Again, a lot of parents get very alarmed when I tell them that studies have shown that the optimal sleeping temperature for human beings is 16 to 18 degrees C. Most people's eyes go out on stalks, particularly my clients who are Middle Eastern, because 16 degrees C is like winter woolies. So you and I, that's a nice summer's day, right? But they're thinking, what? And the way that I explain that is layers on the body, but a cool room. I'm not talking about exposed flesh and 16 degrees, but what I am saying is that cool rooms are, again, going back to our DNA and our ancestral sort of selves, that's what we had. The sun set and it went cold. So we used to sleeping in cold. We need cold as a trigger to a reduction in body temperatures, I should say, to trigger us to go from wakefulness to sleepiness. So cool room, dark room, routine before bed. Fundamentally, you cannot underestimate the importance of those. Then in terms of feedings, depending on the age of your child, feedings will either be timed during the night or not necessary. So from the age of 6 months old or 6.5 kilograms, roughly 6.5, your child is developmentally mature enough to sleep through the night. So I've got 3 months old that sleep through the night. By sleep through the night, I do mean 10 to 12 hours, sorry. I've got 4 months old, 5 months old, and then from 6 months old, genuinely, they should be going to bed, let's say 7 p.m. and waking up at 7 a.m. and no waking in between. to get the sleep that their body needs. Okay, and when some parents think, oh, but my 8-month-old is still feeding 3 times a night, I have a child who's feeding 4 times a night, 18 months. The point is not to misunderstand the indication that they may be hungry, or that they're waking up when they're drinking well. They're taking in the calories that they need in 12 hours across 24 hours. So the 12 hours that they're awake during the day, if anyone can hear my son in the background, the calories that they're taking, that they should be taking in the 12 hours of wake, they're taking in over 24 hours. So they're not taking in enough during the daylight hours, basically. When they stop taking in their calories overnight, they will increase their daytime calories. So their solids intake will be more enthusiastic. Their milk will be drunk more quickly. And a well-rested child will always be more enthusiastic about consuming calories than a tired child. So when you have children that on for a couple of seconds and then off again, especially breastfed babies, or don't finish their meals, those are babies that are lacking in enthusiasm for eating, either because they're tired or because, as well as being tired, they get calories overnight when they're developmentally mature enough not to.
Sure. And I think just one thing to point out, you mentioned that when they sleep, you mean they sleep from when they go to bed to when they wake up. And I think the thing that I found really challenging early on in pregnancy was when you do talk to other parents or mothers about sleeping through the night, people have different definitions of what sleeping through the night means. So to me, sleeping through the night meant she goes to bed and wakes up in the morning. So she sleeps all the way through without disturbing my sleep. Mm-hmm. But to other people, that's not necessarily what that means. And I think if you're if you're a mom with a young child and you've had these conversations, really do bear in mind that you may not have the same definition of what sleeping through the night means.
Precisely, exactly. And this is classic one with cry out. A lot of people misdefine cry out, same with sleeping through the night. So what I would describe as sleeping through the night is, and it will vary a little bit from within the age range, but as you say, when they go to bed, the next time they wake up is morning, as in they leave their bedroom, and they will inevitably, like we all do, wake up or have some wakefulness periods throughout the night, but you won't know about it because they are able to put themselves back to sleep. Just like me, when I wake up in the night, I'm not tapping my husband on the shoulder saying, can you pat me back to sleep? It is absolutely my ownership of my sleep. Sometimes I will wake up, turn over and go straight back to sleep. Sometimes I will wake up, get a glass of water, go back to sleep. Sometimes I'll wake up, maybe go to the bathroom. Okay, if we wake up and it lasts longer than 3 minutes, we have the ability to remember it the next day. If it's less than 3 minutes, we don't remember it the next day. So when you wake up in the night, when you sleep through the night, inevitably you've woken up a few times, but you haven't been awake for long enough that it's disrupted your sleep. And it's the same for babies. So in other words, they may still have wakeful periods, but they are so, firstly, able to put themselves back to sleep, but secondly, brief, that the parent's sleep is not disrupted.
Sure. And you mentioned the blackout blinds, and that made a big difference to us when we introduced the blackout blind. We actually now travel with a blackout blind. Yeah. Because it has such a big impact on her sleep, especially when you're in a different environment as well. So it's like an addition to
yeah, exactly. So another hindrance.
Yeah.
That you want to, yeah.
So what I was always, and I don't know the answer to this, but people always say, aren't they afraid of the dark?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, when they're about 4 years old, that can happen. You can't be afraid of the dark until you know what fear is. You can't know fear unless you know, on balance, the difference between being fearful or having something to be afraid of and not. So you have to be cognitively aware enough of those elements. The other thing is that we have evolved as a species for more years without artificial light than with artificial light. Right. So we've only had artificial light, or light that we can control in terms of turning it on and off, for about 300 years. But we've been in a species for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so our predominant preferences are those previous sort of experiences that we develop as a race, as a mammal. So if you think about it, we used to go to bed when sun set and got up when sun rose. Okay, and depending on where you live in the world will depend on how that affects you, and obviously would depend on the time of year to some extent as well. Well, little babies are very tuned into that, which means that they are perfectly happy to sleep in pitch black, because that's what we've done, you know, it's quite literally for centuries. And likewise, very tuned into sunrise and sunset as their triggers to be asleep and awake. So if your child falls asleep at 10 p.m., but you live in a country where the sun sets at 6 p.m., believe me when I say that's 4 hours that they should be asleep when they're awake. And it's not what their body would prefer.
Right.
And aligned to that, when they start waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, believe me when I say that's what their body prefers, because the sun is rising. Now, if you can black out the room so entirely that it's pitch black, that they can't tell daytime. So when when you go to a hotel, that's the best blackout curtains ever. Those types of blackout curtains are the only ones to believe in as a guarantee that there's no light coming in. I sent a message to a client not that long ago, and I said, is the room dark for naps? And she said, yeah, we've got blackout blinds. And then she went into the room and she sent me a photograph. She's like, yeah, not so much. And there was just cracks everywhere. It just was so funny that she was so confident and then actually checked.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, there isn't. It's not black. Because you and I can fall asleep in daylight because we know that we want to be asleep, but because they are so tuned into daylight and so young and so unaware, that would be disruptive enough. It can often be a small thing that can be a big deal. So going back to something you said about the breastfeeding, okay, I don't ever ask parents to wean or mums to wean. It's not for me to decide when they should stop feeding. But what I am saying to parents is, if your child is falling asleep through that, we need to move that. So like you say, it would be at a different time in their bedtime routine, usually prior to the bath. So then there's a big long gap between, firstly, when they were fed and sleep, but also other things going on to separate out a feeding to sleep association. Again, it would depend on the age. Usually that's appropriate beyond 3 months. And it's appropriate beyond 3 months and older when the child, as I say, is developmentally mature enough to sleep through the night. I'm not asking parents to stop night feeds when the baby isn't ready enough from a size or age point of view. Obviously, that's not appropriate. But babies can fall asleep independently at night, have feedings overnight, and still fall back to sleep independently. Doesn't stop. It doesn't mean to say that they can't learn, even if they're babies that are being fed through the night. So those are not mutually exclusive, you see what I mean?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've got so many more questions to ask, but I know that we'll just keep talking and talking and talking. So I think, I've got you've given us some really good insight, and I'm sure the listeners will take away a lot of information from what we've talked about. But if they do want more information, I know you share a lot of blog posts on your website as well, which are really informative. So I'll share all your details in the show notes, but where's the best place to contact you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my website is sweetdreams.consulting. I have a Facebook page, which is Sweet Dreams Baby Sleep. And either of those have my email address and phone number listed, or obviously you can message me through that. If anyone wants to reach out to me, letting me know that they came via this podcast, your app, that kind of thing, I'm very happy to offer a 10% discount on any services that they choose to hire me for, if that's appropriate for that family. But what I always say to people is, I always offer first initial free of charge phone call to help understand what's going on and what the objective of the parents are, to make sure it's age appropriate and something I can actually help with, but also for the parents to get a sense of me and how I work. And if I feel like the right fit for them. So I really want to get the point across that you may not feel that I am the right person for you, and that's totally fine. It's quite a personality related service in that I want families to know that I'm I'm in their corner, but they obviously want to believe that I am the right person for them. So the free of charge phone call can often mean that I can just give a few tips. If the situation is not so severe or so challenging, they just want a few kind of ideas, then I'm very happy to have a free of charge call to just point them in the right direction. And if that's enough to get them off on the right track to resolving their child's sleep without needing to pay for that service, that's perfectly fine by me. I'd love to be able to help people however I can. So don't hesitate, listeners, if you do want some help, whether it's something that you want to pay for in terms of you need extra support, or perhaps just one or two pointers to get you off on the right track.
That's amazing. And thank you so much. That's so kind of you to offer the 10% off. I will definitely add all your details into the show notes. So a place where it's easy for the listeners to find you. And I just want to thank you again. And I hope that we can do this again at some point, maybe talk a bit more in detail about some of the other things, because I know we've only sort of touched the surface.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big subject. Obviously, we are we are talking about, as I said earlier, a fundamental human need, and as a race, we don't actually understand sleep that much. We are quite uncertain about the elements of sleep that we definitely go through and that we definitely need, and that we don't respond well to if we don't get. But we struggle to understand or to research sleep in the way that gives us a full understanding of it. So it is a big topic, and I would be happy to come back on and offer more help and insight. I'm always learning. I'm reading books and listening to audiobooks about sleep pretty much daily, so I'm always learning, and therefore I've always got more to share. So if the time is right for you, Samaya, in the future, then I'd be happy to.
That's amazing. Thank you so much again, Claudine.
My pleasure.